The call didn't come with sympathy. It didn't come with warning. It came like a knife sliding quietly between ribs, cold, silent, and irreversible. Meghan Markle, the woman who once stood on palace balconies wearing diamonds gifted by a monarchy, was suddenly staring at something far more terrifying than royal rejection. The possibility that the Montecito estate she once treated as her personal fortress had been sold, and no one had asked her permission. No meeting, no negotiation, no emotional preparation, just paperwork, whispers, and the kind of silence that screams betrayal louder than any public scandal ever could. Montecito was never supposed to become a crime scene of emotional abandonment. It was supposed to be the escape hatch, the final destination after royal exile, the carefully curated sanctuary where Meghan and Harry could rewrite their destiny without interference, without judgment, without anyone controlling their narrative ever again. But now insiders are whispering about something that sounds less like a simple property transaction and more like a quiet execution. Because when Meghan reportedly learned that ownership records had shifted overnight, that signatures had been filed, transfers allegedly processed, and authority possibly reassigned without her emotional readiness, the reaction wasn't calm, and it certainly wasn't graceful. It was panic. Pure, raw, unfiltered panic. Not the kind you perform for cameras. The kind that hits when you realize something fundamental has slipped out of your control. Something symbolic. Something permanent. The Montecito mansion was never just brick and marble. It was identity. It was validation. It was proof that she had successfully crossed over from royal dependent to independent power player. Palm trees, ocean air, and manicured privacy weren't just aesthetic luxuries. They were emotional armor. They protected her from the narrative that she had lost everything when she walked away from the crown. They proved she had built something new, something untouchable. But now, insiders are quietly describing a moment that shattered that illusion. The moment Meghan allegedly realized she may no longer control the very ground she once ruled. Because ownership isn't just legal, it's psychological. And when that psychological anchor suddenly feels unstable, everything starts to shake. Neighbors reportedly noticed the shift before Meghan did. The subtle changes that only insiders recognize. Fewer familiar security faces, new vehicles appearing at unusual hours, conversations held in hushed tones between staff who once moved with confidence but now carried an air of uncertainty. Montecito, a community that thrives on discretion, suddenly became a theater of quiet observation. No announcements. No public confirmation, just the eerie sensation that something had changed behind closed gates. And then came the whispers that the estate may have been quietly sold, that financial restructuring had reached a breaking point, that decisions were made not out of preference but out of necessity. Nothing officially confirmed, but enough smoke to send Meghan's emotional equilibrium into freefall. Insiders claim the discovery didn't come during a calm sit-down conversation. It came abruptly, unexpectedly, the kind of revelation that leaves you staring at documents longer than necessary, hoping you misunderstood what your eyes just read. Because losing a house isn't just about losing a location. It's about losing stability, losing narrative control, losing the illusion that everything is still moving according to plan. For Meghan, Montecito wasn't just a residence. It was the physical embodiment of her reinvention. It was the proof that she didn't need royal approval to thrive, that she could create a life bigger, freer, and more powerful than the one she left behind. But if that foundation could be quietly transferred, quietly altered, quietly removed from her control, then what else could disappear without warning? Friends reportedly noticed the emotional fallout immediately, the tension in her voice, the urgency in her conversations, the sudden shift from calculated confidence to something far more fragile. Because this wasn't just about real estate. This was about autonomy, about whether the independence she fought so hard to claim was still fully hers. And behind the scenes, questions reportedly started multiplying faster than answers. Who authorized the sale? Who initiated the transfer? Why did it happen now? And perhaps the most devastating question of all, had she been the last to know? Harry, according to insiders, wasn't immune to the shock, because while Meghan's panic reportedly burned hot and immediate, Harry's reaction was quieter. He didn't explode. He didn't lash out. He absorbed it, internalized it, the same way he internalized the slow unraveling of everything he once believed was permanent. Friends say he looked less angry and more exhausted. ended, as if this moment wasn't an isolated crisis but the latest chapter in a long story of emotional erosion. Because Montecito wasn't just Meghan's symbol, it was his too. It represented the promise that leaving royal life wouldn't leave them empty-handed, that they could build something lasting, something secure. But security, it turns out, can evaporate faster than anyone expects. The financial undertones made the situation even more suffocating. Maintaining a Montecito estate isn't just expensive, it's relentless. Taxes, security, staffing, maintenance, every day carries a cost. And insiders have long whispered that the Sussex brand, once fueled by explosive deals and global fascination, had entered a quieter, more uncertain phase. Opportunities didn't disappear entirely, but they slowed, momentum softened, and sustaining the lifestyle that once symbolized victory began to require harder decisions. What makes this moment especially devastating isn't just the alleged sale itself, it's what it represents emotionally. Because Montecito was supposed to be permanent, it was supposed to be untouchable, it was supposed to be the one place no institution, no palace, no external force could ever take from her. But now, insiders say Meghan feels blindsided, not just by the legal reality, but by the emotional betrayal of losing something she believed was unquestionably hers. And in an elite world where perception shapes reality, losing control, even quietly, can feel more catastrophic than any public scandal ever could. The silence inside the mansion reportedly became unbearable long before any official confirmation surfaced. Because silence in situations like this doesn't soothe, it suffocates. Meghan was allegedly walking through rooms that once echoed with confidence, now filled with the unsettling awareness that something invisible had shifted. Something legal, something permanent, something that no amount of emotional resistance could simply reverse. The marble floors still gleamed, the ocean still whispered beyond the glass, but ownership isn't something you can feel with your hands. It exists on paper. And insiders claim it was that paper, those cold, unfeeling documents, that transformed everything overnight. Because when control slips away quietly, without confrontation, without warning, without even the courtesy of emotional preparation, it creates a different kind of panic. The kind that doesn't explode outward immediately, but instead coils tightly inside, waiting for the moment when reality becomes impossible to deny. What reportedly made the situation even more psychologically destabilizing was the sudden awareness that Montecito itself had already begun emotionally detaching long before any legal transaction was whispered. Neighbors who once observed with curiosity now reportedly watched with distance. The subtle shift in energy, the absence of warmth, the quiet understanding that Montecito had never fully embraced chaos, and chaos, fairly or unfairly, had followed Meghan like a shadow she could never fully outrun. Residents valued invisibility. They valued discretion. They valued lives that didn't demand constant attention. And insiders claim that somewhere along the way, the Sussex presence stopped feeling like quiet coexistence and started feeling like permanent spectacle. Montecito never announced rejection. It never slammed doors. It simply withdrew its emotional welcome, and sometimes that kind of rejection cuts deeper because it arrives without confrontation, leaving you alone with your own conclusions. Friends reportedly describe Meghan's emotional state during those hours as something dangerously close to disbelief. Not denial exactly, but the fragile hope that something could still be clarified, still be corrected, still be explained in a way that restored the illusion of control. Because the mansion wasn't just real estate, it was narrative. It was proof. It was the physical manifestation of her declaration that she didn't need royal structures to survive. Losing that symbol, or even feeling like it had slipped partially beyond her reach, created a psychological fracture that insiders say she wasn't prepared to confront. She had built her reinvention around certainty, around the belief that she was steering her own destiny, that every decision unfolded according to her design. But certainty, like ownership, is far more fragile than it appears. Harry, according to those who observed him closely, reacted differently, not with visible panic, but with something arguably more devastating: resignation. Because this wasn't his first experience watching permanence dissolve. He had already walked away from palaces, from titles, from institutions that had defined his entire identity. He understood, perhaps more than anyone, how quickly the ground beneath your feet can stop belonging to you. Insiders say he didn't rage, he didn't demand explanations, he simply absorbed the reality with a familiar exhaustion, as if he had quietly expected this chapter of instability to arrive eventually. His silence reportedly spoke louder than anger ever could. It wasn't the silence of peace, it was the silence of someone who had learned that fighting every emotional loss only accelerates the erosion of your own strength. Behind the scenes, speculation reportedly began spreading faster than confirmation. Was the sale driven by financial necessity? Was it strategic repositioning? Was it an internal decision made to protect what remained of their financial future? No official answers surfaced, and perhaps that uncertainty itself became the most painful element of all, because uncertainty doesn't just challenge stability, it dismantles confidence, and confidence had been the cornerstone of Meghan's entire post-royal transformation. She had presented independence as empowerment, as liberation, as freedom from institutional control, but freedom carries its own vulnerabilities. There is no palace safety net, no guaranteed permanence, no automatic protection from the consequences of shifting markets, shifting public perception, and shifting opportunities. The emotional symbolism of the Montecito estate made everything heavier. This wasn't just where she lived, this was where she rebuilt herself, where she crafted interviews that shook the monarchy, where she hosted carefully curated moments designed to project strength, success, and invulnerability. Losing control of that environment, even partially, even quietly, felt like losing more than property. It felt like losing narrative authority, because environments shape identity, and when the environment changes without your consent, it forces you to confront the terrifying possibility that identity itself may no longer be fully yours to define. Insiders claim Meghan allegedly began exploring options immediately, not because she had emotionally accepted the loss, but because survival in elite circles requires constant forward motion. There is no room for visible collapse. There is no space for public vulnerability. Reinvention isn't optional, it's mandatory. But reinvention becomes exponentially harder when the foundation beneath you feels unstable. Every decision becomes heavier. Every choice carries consequences that can't be reversed. And every step forward feels like walking across emotional ice that could fracture without warning. What makes this moment especially brutal is the psychological contradiction it creates. Because publicly, Meghan still represents strength, autonomy, independence. But privately, insiders suggest she may be confronting a reality far more fragile. The realization that independence doesn't guarantee permanence and autonomy doesn't guarantee control. Even the most carefully constructed reinvention can be disrupted by forces that operate quietly, legally, and without emotional consideration. Montecito was never just geography. It was sanctuary. It was escape. It was proof of victory after exile. And now, whether temporarily or permanently, that sanctuary reportedly feels compromised. The walls still stand, the gates still close, the ocean still moves beyond the horizon. But ownership isn't defined by architecture. It's defined by authority. And insiders say that authority may have shifted in ways Meghan never expected, never approved, and never emotionally prepared herself to accept. Because in the end, the most devastating losses aren't the ones announced publicly. They're the ones that unfold quietly, behind closed doors, in moments where no cameras are present to capture the emotional fallout. Moments where the person who once controlled everything suddenly realizes that control was never as permanent as it felt. And now, as whispers continue spreading and certainty remains elusive, one question hangs in the air heavier than any official confirmation ever could. If Montecito was supposed to be her forever, what happens when forever quietly disappears overnight? Disappears overnight. Disappears overnight. Disappears.